I want to start though with some caveat, some full disclosure that we were asked to share about some of the changes that we are pursuing within the school to our faculty reward and recognition practices and policies. And we are, again, excited to be able to do that. But they are very much a work in progress. We are still really in the early days. So I just want to make sure that what I'm going to share, and then particularly what Dr. Brook will share about her even longer trajectory of focus on this nexus of community engagement and faculty rewards, won't sound like we have the answers or we've arrived at a destination, because what we really want to do is share some of the discernment that we have undertaken, the conversations that we're having, and then hope that we will show up and engage with you all as our university colleagues as a part of that this ongoing process. So I guess there are a little bit more caveats. I think it's as I was preparing this and talking with some of our colleagues, it strikes me that the middle of a still evolving global health emergency that has upended all of our lives and our work is perhaps not the most natural time to think about reshaping how we do faculty rewards and promotion and tenure specifically, and probably a relatively small professional school that is in the process of continual new search to add to our capacity, maybe isn't the most natural fit for that work either. So I think that in order to understand why us, why the School of Social Welfare, and why right now, particularly when we're also redoing our entire curricular structure as well, it's important to understand who we are as a school, what social work tries to be in the world, and really what our faculty and scholars are looking for in processes and policies to support them as they pursue their desired impact in the world. And it really flows from a process catalyzed by our school community a few years ago to overhaul our mission and vision. And now, since that time, we have a new dean, we have several new faculty, new research centers, and this new curriculum. But these statements still serve as a valuable guide and guardrail for making decisions for our school about what we prioritize and who we hire and how we allocate scarce resources. So it then is necessary for any work that we do in this area of faculty rewards to also be informed by these core principles. So as we think that, that means that as we are undertaking this work, we need to ask what kinds of community partnerships in research, participation in community-led initiatives, dissemination products and pathways, how is all of that going to drive toward this vision of all families, individuals, and communities can utilize their power to achieve justice and equity and well-being? And then that's what we want to reward. So we try to keep that at the center, and we'll actually circle back to it at the very end of this presentation. The final component in our reconsideration of who we are and who we want to be articulated our core values. And there are several, but the ones that are most directly relevant to this evolving conversation about faculty and staff rewards are relationship building. How do we provide space and credit for scholars to do deep relational work? Do we center diverse communities and their voices in our work? Are we critically contesting not only the substance of scholarship, but also its structure and form, the audiences with which we're engaging? And are we ensuring that we disseminate in ways that give practitioners access to the empirical evidence that we generate? So these values show up a lot and really serve as the North Star, so to speak, for the changes that we are trying to leverage. We are also a school steeped in the strengths perspective, and that means that the kind of last element that of who we are that really informs how we do this work is a cataloging of some of the considerable assets that we bring to this reconsideration of what we count and how much it counts. We have an extensive reliance on authentic field partnerships, and indeed our students can't graduate without being rooted in and in deep and ongoing partnership with those community constituencies. And we have a school-supported community center for community engagement and collaboration. And it is, admittedly limited in capacity as well, but it exists. And I'll talk a little bit more after we get to hear from Jody about the way that we try to leverage CCEC in this work as well. Jody?
Thanks, Melinda. So I first want to begin by saying that, I think that when we talk about community engagement and we talk about how that's rewarded, it's important to understand that most of our faculty have very, very strong community connections with their topical area and focus of scholarship. So we're talking about a faculty that collectively is committed to working in the community and that explicitly values these strong community connections as really important voices that guide and shape the research that we conduct. And so that might be different. I suspect it is very different at many other units within the university setting. But for us, these strong community connections are a major driver. So we then, decided that we were not acknowledging, rewarding, and thinking about the time and the effort and the energy that it took to be connected to the community in our formal processes. And basically, what happened is we created a lot of add-ons for our pre-tenured faculty members. So in other words, you had to have your journal articles, you had to have things that were in the community, you had to have collaborative work, you had to have social work, socially engaged work. And what ended up happening is that we never really, from my perspective, refined our policies. We just kept adding things that we thought were important. And this has created an environment where individuals felt like they were having to do much of the work that is largely unacknowledged in university processes. So we decided kind of that we're going to begin changing along multiple prongs at the same time. But what to change? We first kind of focused on scholarly impact and measurement. And Melinda, if we could go to the next slide, that would be great. So largely our faculty and our staff researchers really started chafing against constraints that were imposed by what we saw as other driven priorities in the PRT and in the acknowledgement process. So a particular emphasis like Professor Hoffman was talking about this morning on chasing your metrics, on defining work as major and minor based on where that work ended up, people not being given sufficient credit for deep community engagement. And specifically, I want to say that to conduct deep community engagement, for those of you who have not worked in this space before, it takes many years. And really, really major driver of healthy communities is having researchers who are going to be able to be community driven and who are able to center the community needs. And the timelines of doing that are often quite incompatible with the timelines for promotion, review and tenure. And so there's just a mismatch there. There is, I believe, industry-wide limited recognition of alternative dissemination approaches. So I work heavily in the substance abuse and child welfare community. No one that I work with ever reads my journal articles. And so if I want to produce something in a way that's meaningful to the people that I hope to reach, it's got to be through a different medium, and there really has been very little acknowledgement of that, as well as just a lack of acknowledgement of community processes, such as consensus building. So in most of our federal grants, the feds require a year of programming. So when we go to implement an intervention into the community, the feds say, that's great that you proposed this, but we want you to spend a year making sure what you did is, is targeted towards the right community, and it's responsive to the community, and it's sustainable. Well, the problem with that for younger scholars in the tenure process is they need data from which to publish. If you follow the traditional model of academia, they've got to get in, they've got to get data collected, and they have to be publishing findings if they want to make the case for tenure. And so this, our funding source will actually grant us the time to plan. It's our own internal processes at the university level that don't acknowledge this. And, there is just a very important relationship between community engagement and addressing the issues related to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And there not only needs to be community-centered processes, but we need to make sure that our research is both responsive to and including the needs of diverse populations. And I think this became very apparent to us as a faculty with much of the recent social justice movements and looking at disparities that have been laid bare through research and through community experience. But one of the things we also realized is that as an entity, we were not doing the best job we could do to retain scholars who might be members of those communities because of this timeline problem and what we value problem. Keeps individual community members out of academia. And so we know that we did less well in this area, and we kind of began asking ourselves, how can we address this? And so, so just kind of moving forward, we, the PRT committee looked at this, and Jason Matakowski is on this call, and he was a co-chair with me in leading this. But what we did here is we kind of grabbed some of the low-hanging fruit that we could and began making changes there, like making sure our language acknowledged, importance of different types of work. But then we've also formed an ad hoc committee that that includes members of the PRT committee, but also members of from different ranks and our research faculty members who are reviewed by the same PRT committee. And so we're looking at what counts as scholarship, how we think about scholarly activity, who it is we want to be as scholars, and then aligning our vision with the procedures that are in place for us. And so, we are working very hard to begin developing our language around the engaged scholar. As a community, we read Dr. Hoffman's book and had meetings about it. We've had research conversations, and we're examining kind of in a systematic way what other units on KU's campus are doing that might be helpful to us in modifying some of our language, but also what other universities are doing that might be helpful to us. And that's where we are in our process. And Melinda, I'll let you pick it up from here.
Thanks, Jody. I think actually in the interest of time, I'm just going to share just like two kind of pieces that I think could be helpful maybe to folks who were like, okay, but what might this look like for us and for our units? And then I do want to stop so that we can hopefully, Chris can facilitate some discussion. But I think it's important to acknowledge the role of leadership. Dr. Amy Mendenhall is also here, and having an associate dean for research who really legitimizes the idea of community engagement in scholarship, I think creates some space and really sends valuable signals. We do have the Center for Community Engagement and Collaboration, and we don't at all like bridge the gap entirely, the strain that people face that Jody was talking about, having to do this and this. But we do have some additional capacity to show up and stay in relationships in ways that can then also help to broker opportunities for our scholars who may have to attend to reward in a different way than some of us as staff in CCEC do. And it was particularly rewarding for me that in some research that we did, some surveying within the school to talk about what are the barriers that you chafe against. What didn't come up was the discouragement of public affairs. And I hope that that may be in part some of the ways that we at CCEC have tried to help folks connect to public affairs personnel and leaders within the university and really disseminate their work in ways that have public impact. We are also incorporating these concepts into our search, and I'm sure that Dr. Mendenhall or others within the school who really lead that work would be happy to talk about it. But really just want to say that we believe that our vision and values need to be central to this, that it's that vision that's going to motivate us through the barriers and obstacles that we will inevitably encounter and are motivated for that work because of how important we really believe that it is.
To kind of get us going here, I don't see any questions popping up. So why don't I talk just a little bit here in hopes that some questions will pop up. If folks weren't able to join the first session this morning, I had a few minutes is all to just talk about some of the work that I'm trying to do as, you know, an objective leader and also an action leader, and some of the work that Jamela Watson-Thompson is leading with her group on community engagement and finding rewards and incentives. So I have an opportunity to stitch a number of things together. And one of the things I said, knowing about all the work that you do, is that we've got to engage the doers. In our strategic doing, let's engage the folks who are already doing this. And so it's great to hear from Joe and others in architecture and design and you all, because you are some of the units that have some of the most experience unit-wide, is what I'm saying, unit-wide doing something, and then really thinking about what are the systemic things that are keeping it from achieving even higher levels. And so I want to do what I can through the Jayhawks Rising process to engage you all to find out what it is you're doing. Basically, you've got some cookbooks here for other units to follow, because you've got even kind of what the ingredients are, but then, you know, the process. You stir this part to get to the next step, which is to get it into the oven. And I just want to signal to you know, the group here that in addition to that work that's already being done at the unit level, we've got work to do with governance and VPs and deans as well, to look at our university standards to be sure that there's language in there that signals and validates the work that you're doing. Because like when I meet with the University Committee on Promotion and Tenure coming up here next month to look at the latest round of reviews that come up, we don't have a preconceived notion as to what community engagement is. We're not going to judge that. We're going to look at what the criteria are at the unit levels and the department levels. And if they're there and explained, we use that as our guide to look at people's criteria. So as units are interested in involving more and more faculty in their work, I really encourage them to use the work that you've already done as a pathway to have these conversations and begin to change the criteria at the unit level, because without that, we can't force it necessarily on the university that this is what community engaged scholarship is. It means so many different things across all the different disciplines, but engagement broadly and the impact that it has, we definitely want to value that at the university level.
Just you were talking about at the university level, what are some of those changes, and this idea that like something's got to give, right? Or as Jody said, we're just going to end up tacking on and piling on more. So how do we need to really recalibrate so that we are more fully centering engagement?
I'm really interested to know what other units have initiated these kinds of conversations, because I really think it's key in order to make progress in this as a university, we've got to put all the partners together that are thinking about this specifically, and I'm talking specifically around, faculty evaluation guidelines and promotion and tenure. How do we measure engagement in the community? This is something that the consortium is thinking about. Different kinds of ways of measuring engagement, not only the products of engagement, but also levels of engagement with the community. So anybody want to tackle that one?
I can provide an example, Chris.
Yep.
So I'm Emily Roundtree. I'm the Associate Director in the Center for Service Learning. I've been working with Chris on this subcommittee of the Community Engagement Consortium and thinking about faculty rewards at the institutional level. And one of the measures that I know, this is just like a real simple example, but at the University of San Francisco, what they do is they have all of their service learning courses. So those faculty that are integrating community and engaged components into their course and working with their students and working with partners as part of their course and themes and theories of what they're learning, is that they actually count the service learning courses as more than one course. So when they go up for promotion and tenure, the course actually counts as like 1 1/3 courses. And so it kind of gets them to the number of courses that they need for promotion and tenure a little bit quicker. So that's just one measure. It's pretty simple, but there are kind of ways that other universities are working around this way to quantify what folks are doing in the area of community engagement, because it's really hard to measure, and it does take so much more work, but it ends up being, as we know, so much more worth it for the folks who are engaging in it.
I want to say, I think that I have seen some things like presentations that are and publications that are done and co-written with community members, and as part of community initiatives are designated as certain things on the, in certain ways on the CV. And I think that's a really low-hanging fruit item. Like, there's an asterisk by every time you presented with someone who was your community colleague in research. That's a really low-hanging fruit kind of way to grab that. I think the more difficult thing becomes when we look at standards for promotion and tenure. What is it we're valuing besides A-level peer-reviewed publications and number of attempts at funding? Like, was the funding for a community engaged project? What went into developing the proposal? Things like that. So I think there are ways that we're learning that people are doing this, but I think this is a really new area too.
Yeah, and something I think that we're going to have to figure out, and again, I really think it begins at the unit level, at the school level or at the department level for schools with departments, is there's always this discussion in this about whether community engagement is something that you do in addition to, or is it part and parcel? And therefore, if you're comparing someone's record with someone who doesn't do any community engagement at all, it counts for some of the stuff that person already does. So units that have faculty who do lots of community engagement and other faculty who don't do any at all, there is going to have to be an internal discussion as to whether, one, let's say if you follow the advice of Andy Hoffman, if you're an A-level publication type faculty member and you begin to be engaged in some of this other work, and as you move towards that work, instead of having to do 2 a year, 1 is sufficient with the added community engaged work, if it's documented, right? So those are discussions that units are going to have, I think. I'm not sure, but that's an issue that I think that we're going to have to really rely on what it is the units want to do. But we also want to help especially if it's younger faculty who are engaged in this kind of work. It's difficult for them as junior scholars to have conversations with senior scholars about how you should change the criteria on which they're judged, right? So perhaps the question is, what can we do from the provost's office to help encourage those conversations so that they do happen? Not that it guarantees the result, but at least it encourages the conversations. That's something I'm definitely thinking about in my position. So Shannon says, while we may have faculty evaluation guidelines in place, it's a cultural shift, really.
I mean, I think that I know from my work, which is a lot around policy change, that cultural shifts can create momentum for policy change, and policy can drive cultural, if not beliefs, at least practices, because people will comply with those policy requirements. So thinking about probably, with so much diversity in kind of where different units on campus are mentally around this issue, probably we're going to need some of both, right? There are probably some places, Shannon, where there are faculty and folks within that, as constituents within that are clamoring for the change, and so therefore they're going to drive policy change that will affirm what they're doing, and probably other places where people may have some greater tension around community engagement, but if we signal that it's an expectation, that can drive changes in practices too. So I think there's some both and opportunity there.
I just want to say, this is all in process. This is a conversation that is ongoing. And I think it's really important to just acknowledge where we all are in this and the diversity of ways in which we approach it, with everyone, doing their level best to try to create a better system of equity and acknowledgement and alignment, really, within the university setting.